What if the kindest person you know, the one you trust with your deepest secrets, the one who shows up for you every single time, what if that person, under the right circumstances, could become someone you fear? Not a villain from a movie. Not a criminal. Just them. Changed. Here's the part that should shake you. This isn't a theory. It's happened. It's documented. And psychologists have proven, over and over, that the same thing could happen to you. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most disturbing truths about the human mind. Why do good, decent, ethical people sometimes cross into darkness? By the time this video ends, you'll never look at yourself, or the people around you, the same way again. There's a concept in psychology that should be taught in every school on the planet. It's called the Lucifer Effect, and it was brought to mainstream attention by Dr. Philip Zimbardo, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. The name itself tells you everything. Lucifer, in theological tradition, was not a demon created in darkness. He was an angel, the brightest one, who fell. The transformation from light to darkness. That's the point. Zimbardo's research, including the now legendary Stanford Prison Experiment, revealed something that most of us are deeply uncomfortable accepting. It's not just bad people who do bad things. It's ordinary people, people exactly like you and me, placed in the wrong environment, given the wrong role, or exposed to the wrong authority. And they transform. History doesn't let us look away from this. The guards who ran Nazi concentration camps weren't monsters recruited from asylums. Many were neighbors, fathers, and churchgoers before the war. Soldiers who carried out ethnic cleansing had families waiting at home. Bystanders who watched atrocities unfold in silence weren't heartless, many were genuinely horrified. But they stayed quiet. How does this happen? What flips the switch inside a person? The answer is layered, and each layer should feel personal, because every single one of them is operating in your life right now. The obedience trap. In the early 1960s, a Yale psychologist named Stanley Milgram ran an experiment that still haunts the field of psychology decades later. Participants were brought into a lab and told they were part of a study on learning and memory. They were seated in front of a panel with switches labeled with increasing voltage levels, from mild shock all the way up to warnings that read, "Danger, severe shock." On the other side of a wall sat another person, actually an actor, who would cry out in pain as the voltage supposedly increased. Here's what Milgram found. The majority of participants continued administering shocks, even when they believed they were causing severe pain, simply because a calm authority figure in a lab coat told them to continue. No threats. No weapons. Just a voice of authority saying, "Please continue." The experiment requires that you go on. And most people went on. Now ask yourself honestly, how often do you follow instructions without questioning them? From a manager, a political figure, a social norm. How many times have you compromised something you believed in because someone above you said it was necessary? The Milgram experiment isn't just a relic of history. It's playing out in boardrooms, governments, and dinner tables right now. The permission slip for cruelty. There's a reason that propaganda always begins with language. Before any group is persecuted, they are first labeled. They become the enemy, vermin, invaders, or less than human. When we strip another person of their full humanity, when they become a category instead of an individual, something dangerous happens in our psychology. Empathy switches off. It becomes dramatically easier to justify harm when the target no longer feels fully human to us. This isn't ancient history. Look at the language used in modern political discourse. Look at how groups are reduced to stereotypes online, how entire populations are collapsed into a single threatening label. Ask yourself, in your own life, have you ever caught yourself thinking of a group of people as those people? Have you ever dismissed someone's pain because of what they represented to you, rather than who they actually were? That mental shortcut, that tiny step toward dehumanization, is the same mechanism, just at a smaller scale. And it matters. The role you're playing right now. The Stanford Prison Experiment is controversial, but its central finding is impossible to ignore. College students were randomly divided into two groups, guards and prisoners, in a simulated prison environment. Within days, not weeks, not months, days, the guards began abusing their power. Prisoners showed signs of psychological breakdown. Students who had been screened for mental stability and decency were acting out scenarios none of them would have predicted for themselves. They had become their roles. This raises an unsettling question: how much of what you think is your personality is actually just the role you've been assigned? The obedient employee. The agreeable family member. The person who doesn't make waves. Are you choosing who you are, or are you performing what your environment expects? The line doesn't get crossed all at once. That's the part most people miss. It starts with silence. Not speaking up when you witness something unfair because it feels easier. It starts with one small compromise, going along with something questionable just this once. It starts with a rationalization that sounds completely reasonable in the moment. Everyone does it. I don't have a choice. The bigger picture matters more than this one situation. Psychologist Albert Bandura called this moral disengagement, the internal process by which we create psychological distance between ourselves and our own harmful actions. We build a story that lets us off the hook. And the more we do it, the easier it gets. Think about your own life. Has there been a moment where you did something that conflicted with your values, but you talked yourself into it? What was the story you told yourself? That story is the mechanism. That's where the Lucifer Effect lives, not in dramatic moments of obvious evil, but in the quiet negotiations we make with our own conscience every single day. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung introduced a concept he called the shadow, the darker, suppressed dimension of the human psyche. The parts of ourselves we'd rather not acknowledge. The capacity for anger, cruelty, jealousy, and selfishness that sits beneath the surface of every well-mannered person. Jung didn't introduce the shadow to terrify us. He introduced it because he believed that ignoring it is what makes it dangerous. When we pretend we have no darkness, when we are certain that we would never do what those people did, we become the most vulnerable. Because that certainty is exactly what the Lucifer Effect exploits. Have you ever felt an emotion so intense, rage, envy, contempt, that it surprised even you? That's the shadow making itself known. And the healthiest response isn't shame. It's awareness. Because awareness is your greatest defense. Moral courage is not a personality trait reserved for heroes. It's a practiced skill. Rosa Parks was not unafraid. Whistleblowers who expose corruption are not without anxiety. The difference is that they acted despite the fear. You build this capacity by identifying your non-negotiable values and repeatedly asking whether your actions align with them. Not occasionally, daily. Try this, mentally rehearse challenging scenarios. What would you do if you witnessed someone being treated unjustly at work? What would you say if you were pressured to act against your values? Rehearsing these moments in your mind makes you significantly more likely to act with integrity when they happen in real life. Most social pressure is invisible precisely because it's been normalized. The first step to resisting it is to see it. Start paying attention to group norms in every environment you enter. What behavior is rewarded? What is silently discouraged? Are people who speak up protected or marginalized? These invisible structures shape behavior far more than most people realize. When you notice something feels off, trust that instinct. Ask yourself, am I going along with this because it's right, or because it's expected? After spending decades studying how ordinary people become perpetrators, Zimbardo asked a different question: how do ordinary people become heroes? He called the answer the heroic imagination, the cultivated belief that you are someone who can and will act when it matters. Not because you're special, but because you've chosen to see yourself that way. You build this by practicing small acts of moral courage consistently. Standing up for someone being excluded. Refusing to laugh at a joke that dehumanizes. Choosing honesty when a comfortable lie was available. Each small act rewires your self-image. And your self-image determines your behavior under pressure. There will be moments when you fail. Fear will win. Pressure will override your values. You'll look back at something you did or didn't do and feel the weight of it. What you do with that weight matters enormously. Self-forgiveness is not the same as excuse-making. It means acknowledging the failure clearly, understanding what drove it, taking whatever responsibility is possible, and then releasing the guilt that would otherwise keep you stuck. People who are consumed by shame over past moral failures are paradoxically less likely to act ethically in the future. The goal is not to be someone who never fails. It's to be someone who learns from failure and moves forward with more clarity. Here is the insight that changes everything. The line between good and evil does not run between different types of people. It does not separate heroes from villains, the educated from the ignorant, or the religious from the secular. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote after surviving one of history's most brutal systems, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. Every human being. Including you. Including the people you admire most. Including the people you've written off as beyond redemption. This is not a dark conclusion. It's a liberating one. Because if darkness is not confined to other people, then neither is the power to choose light. Every single one of us carries both. And every single moment is a decision point. The same psychological forces that enable atrocity also enable extraordinary acts of courage, compassion, and sacrifice. The same capacity for dehumanization, when reversed, becomes the engine of empathy. The same obedience that enables harm, when redirected toward moral courage, becomes the force that ends it. You are not a passive recipient of your circumstances. You are an active participant in determining what those circumstances become. So here's your challenge, and it's one most people won't take seriously enough. Think back to the very first question of this video. What if someone you trusted transformed into someone you barely recognized? Now ask the harder version, what if that person is you, and it's already beginning? Not because you're bad. Because you're human. And because the forces we talked about today don't ask permission. They operate quietly, through small moments, everyday choices, and the roles you accept without questioning. The only real defense is what you do right now, the awareness you carry into tomorrow, the next conversation, the next moment where it would be easier to look away. History doesn't remember the people who stayed silent. It remembers the ones who chose to act. Which one will you be?